Draco Malfoy, and the year when everyone suddenly paid attention to him. Bye, Draco. We'll hear about this. Chapter 5. Mix it up. Things at Hogwarts started to settle into a new kind of routine soon, despite the frequent interludes that brought along news from the outside world reminding them that they were indeed at the brink of a war. Stan Shunpike, the conductor of the night bus, for instance, had been arrested for Death Eater connections, which Harry, who had met the bloke before, had found very dubious indeed. The mood amongst the students was all in all remarkably cheerful, especially in comparison to the disaster that had been the previous year. Personally, Draco was enjoying himself more than ever. He spent most of his meal times at the Gryffindor table, sometimes only in the company of Harry, Hermione, and Weasley, but sometimes in larger groups, with Ginny, Thomas, Finnegan, Longbottom, or even Luna joining them from the Ravenclaw table. And then there was Quidditch practice, which turned out to be a real blast, now that he actually had a team that didn't consist of a selection of gits. Draco had never been able to really connect with any of his housemates before, but there on the pitch, laughing along with everyone as Ryan imitated Snape in such an eerie manner that the teacher himself might have given him detention for the insolence, Draco seemed to have dropped into a parallel universe. "Do that against Gryffindor, and you might paralyze some of them," Karina snickered. "Pikes would definitely be spooked," Zoe snorted. "He's not you. You should have seen him all these years in potions." "Well, pulling a Snape sounds tempting, and would surely make Weasley fall dead off his broom," Draco grinned, making everyone laugh. "It would only infuriate Harry and Ginny, and they are both forces to be reckoned with. I know those Gryffindors. We need to beat them through skill, not through sneak."
"Oh, man,"
Yatin complained.
"where's the fun in that?" Viola kicked him.
A smile on her lips. "Oh, believe me," Draco snorted. "I'll have lots of fun if you lot can repeatedly score against Weasley."
"I thought he was your friend?"
Eureka taunted from between the loops, dark eyes dancing with mirth. "We have a complicated relationship," Draco said airily, and the others snickered. "Fact is, I want to kick some Gryffindor arse at the opening match. I've lost against Harry more than enough times. This is the first time I have an actual team to play with, not just a bunch of losers."
"Here, here," Viola called, proceeding to curse Flint and Montague all the way to Sunday.
"Noted," Abbas said in his overzealous manner, staring him down with his beater's bat resting against his shoulder. "Kick Gryffindor all, disgrace Weasley in particular. Can we now please continue with practice?" Draco laughed at Abbas's open impatience, gesturing for him to go on. "By all means, don't let me stop you," he chuckled. "Wouldn't want it said that your captain keeps you from practice."
"You'd better not, Mr. Malfoy, or I'll personally request a change of house for you so I don't have to deal with you anymore,"
Ryan told him in his best Snape voice, and Draco couldn't help but laugh as he flipped him off. Ryan just stuck his tongue out at him and proceeded to do his exercises with Abbas. They headed up to the castle together after practice, chatting away animatedly as they entered the great hall. The house tables were still fairly empty, and Draco noted that Harry, Hermione, and Weasley were nowhere to be seen, probably either in the library or up at their common room. Ginny was there, though, doing homework with Luna, and they waved him over as they caught sight of him.
"You know,"
Eureka said, a frown on her face as he turned to excuse himself.
"you don't need to always deflect to the Gryffindors. You can stay with your own house every once in a while."
That made Draco pause to frown at her. "I've never had much reason to," he admitted. "I've got friends there, you know."
"And what are we, next-door neighbors?"
Ryan prompted, raising an eyebrow.
"Leave the poor kid alone,"
Viola snorted.
"We've all got our own circles of friends, and that's okay, isn't it? I don't hang out with Yatin either just because we're in the same year and on the same team."
"Who would hang up with you?" Yatin rolled his eyes, making a face as he took off to find his own friends. Viola smiled sweetly, following after him. Zoe and Karina had already taken off unnoticed, sitting with a group of third-year Slytherins at their house table.
"That doesn't mean we can't mix it up every now and then,"
Eureka mumbled in Viola's wake.
"Just saying."
"You know what?" Draco frowned, looking back towards Ginny and Luna, who were watching them with interest, and then grinning at Eureka and Ryan. "You're completely right. We should totally mix things up a little." He waited for the words to sink in, but when the other two just stared at him blankly, he grabbed the sleeves of their robes and dragged them along to the Gryffindor table. "Follow me." "Well, Draco, are you insane?" "They're
They're Gryffindors, Malfoy.
They're in your year, Ryan. Calm down. I promise you're not going to catch lion cooties or anything. He teased, and when they reached the Gryffindor house table, they had started to attract quite some attention. Mind you, the Great Hall was still quite empty, and therefore two kicking and screaming Slytherins being dragged over to the Gryffindor table stood out a bit. Ginny and Luna were still staring at them, Luna curious, Ginny amused, and Draco saw her pressing her lips together to keep from laughing. Ginny, Luna, Draco said, slinging an arm each around his teammates' shoulders to keep them from running. You know Eureka and Ryan? They're on my team.
Yeah, I'd heard you made the tryouts,
Ginny answered, clearing her throat in an attempt to stay serious.
Congrats! I'm looking forward to playing you.
Likewise, Eureka said quite stiffly. I heard you were quite good.
I heard the same about you,
Ginny returned the compliment. You're both forces to be reckoned with, Draco agreed, pushing both his reluctant Slytherin teammates into their seats and sitting down between them. It's actually going to be interesting seeing you face off against each other.
It's nice of you to bring Slytherin friends, Draco,
Luna said, so sudden and earnest and in complete Luna fashion that it took everyone by surprise.
We never have Slytherins in our group. You're always the only one.
I am, Draco agreed, glancing from Ryan to Eureka pointedly. It was about time that changed.
I feel like I'm being dragged into a cult,
Ryan murmured.
Like that one time my mother had that friend over who tried to convince her to join that witch circle of crazy hags who bathed naked in lakes and worshipped their vaginas.
Jenny sputtered at a laugh and Eureka groaned.
What did we say about brain-to-mouth filter, Ryan?
She muttered.
Can't take you nowhere.
I promise we'll not make you worship anything, Draco chuckled, holding up his hands.
Not even butter?
He checked, his lips quivering. You can try, Draco snorted, but then he'll throw you out of this group faster than you can say Quidditch.
Wow, you might break my brain with such unexpected information,
Ryan gasped.
It's not code of conduct in your little club to pray to the chosen one. You're shattering everything I ever believed in.
God, you're so dramatic. Eureka rolled her eyes. Ginny was still chuckling, but then someone caught her eye down the table and her smile widened, turning slightly malicious as she leaned towards Draco.
You're being watched, Draco,
she muttered, tilting her head to the right in indication, and Draco followed her gaze to find Patil and Brown down the table. When his eyes met Patil's, she smiled brightly, waving at him, and he nodded awkwardly, quickly looking away. To Ginny, he groaned loudly, making her giggle.
I hear her swooning about you in the common room sometimes,
she informed him.
It's quite sickening. Who?
Ryan demanded, leaning in.
If I get gossip out of it, I'm all for this house exchange thing.
Of course you are. Eureka sighed, but Ginny the traitor had already turned to Ryan to point discreetly into Patil's direction. She's a menace, Draco groaned. How do I get rid of her?
You'd think he'd be flattered.
Ginny rolled her eyes, grinning at Ryan, before turning to Draco to continue teasing.
She's pretty, you know.
I don't care, Draco growled. I don't want her moaning after me. Make her stop!
You make it sound like it's up to me,
Ginny laughed.
You got yourself into it by being fanciful. You get yourself out of it.
You know, you could just tell her you're not interested, Eureka told him, raising an eyebrow. It's not alchemy. I prefer alchemy, Draco groaned, and Ginny snorted. Eureka caught her eyes, and they exchanged a look of deep suffering that crossed over their house borders. Boys, Eureka sighed, making a face.
Tell me about it,
Ginny sighed.
You can't imagine the discussions I've had with this one. Feelings aren't his straw suit. Tell me more,
Ryan said eagerly, and Draco hit him on the back of the head, glowering at Ginny and warning. It was then that Harry, Hermione, and Weasley finally joined them, looking a little disconcerted by the presence of two unknown Slytherins. Sir Draco hastened to make introductions, which Ryan promptly ruined by identifying Weasley as...
So it's him we're going to try our best to humiliate throughout the match?
This earned him another slap on the back of his head from Draco, and Eureka kept muttering about brain-to-mouth filters. So all in all, Draco was not sure they made the best impression on them in particular, but unlike with Patil, Harry seemed to hold no particular grudge against them, so it was probably a minor success. The only time Harry mentioned the pair of them was when their Hogsmeade weekend drew nearer, and he asked whether Draco would be going with them or not. "Of course I'm going with you," Draco had told him, confused. "Why wouldn't I?" "Well," Harry had shrugged, looking embarrassed. "You have other friends now, too. I didn't want to assume—" "Oh, come on, Vince!" Draco rolled his eyes. "I always go to Hogsmeade with you. It's not going to change just because there's a couple of Slytherins now that I actually like." Harry had smiled at that, and that had been it. No more had been said against his teammates. The day of their first Hogsmeade trip of the year, the second weekend of October, was a cold and rainy day, and the mood between the four of them matched the weather. Apparently, Harry had tried out some spell from his potions book this morning in his dormitory, leaving Hermione in a foul mood, and the tension carried itself all the way to the village on the other side of the lake. The atmosphere in Hogsmeade wasn't much better. Some stores, including Zonko's, had closed down, leaving the place much more dull than before, and rushing their group straight towards the Three Broomsticks for a butterbeer. Unfortunately, half the school had had the same idea, including Slughorn, who proceeded to invite Hermione and Harry to another meeting of the Slug Club on Monday. Harry was able to wriggle out of it again, seeing that he had his next class with Dumbledore scheduled that very same day, but the fact that he had been willfully ignored by the teacher once more sat bitterly with Weasley, causing him to snap at them. After Slughorn, though, they ran into someone even more unpleasant. Draco had only met Mundungus Fletcher once, when Dora had had him over for some information exchanged regarding the Order, and all he knew about him was that he was a shady underground dealer working for Dumbledore. As it turned out, though, he was also using his connections to the Order to get his hands on valuable goods, namely Sirius's possessions. The realization of what he was trying to sell had Harry lose his temper faster than a Niffler could have nicked the silver goblet from Mundungus's hands, and only with a lot of effort and mediation were they able to bring Harry into the pub without anyone getting hurt. Mundungus had the good sense to escape. "Well, I'm going to tell Dumbledore what's going on," Harry announced grimly, his fingers nearly white, so tightly were they clenched around his butterbeer. "He's the only one who scares Mundungus." "Good idea," Hermione whispered, keen on calming Harry down, her eyes flitting to Weasley, who was looking out over the bar absent-mindedly. "Ron, what are you staring at?" "Nothing," he muttered too quickly, shaking his head as if to shake off his thoughts and meet her eyes, though Draco knew as well as everyone else at this table that he had been lusting for a glance at the busty barmaid, Madame Rosmerta. "I expect nothing is in the back getting more fire whiskey," Hermione told him, her voice a brick of ice. Draco closed his eyes and resisted the urge to bang his head against the table. Hard. Maybe he should have gone to the village with his Slytherin teammates after all. Clearly his Gryffindor friends were unfit for company today. It didn't take long for them to call it a day and leave. They were one of the first, Draco couldn't help but note. Most students were still happily scooped up in their seats, enjoying their free time, and Draco felt a little envious of them, especially when they passed Madame Puttyfoot's and they caught sight of Ginny comfortably resting against Thomas. A sharp longing twisted through him, and he couldn't help but let out a little sigh as he redirected his gaze away from the window of the tea shop and back onto the street ahead of him. It took him a second too long to realize that Harry was watching him, a deep frown on his face, biting his lips as if he was contemplating the secrets of the universe. Their eyes met, and Harry startled, quickly averting his gaze, and to Draco's immense discomfort, flushing. Draco was unable to focus on any kind of conversation for the entirety of their walk back, his heart hammering in his chest, because this couldn't be happening. Harry couldn't just do this to him. He couldn't just keep sending him little signs like that, signs that would be so easy for Draco to interpret the way Hermione and Ginny wanted him to, but then, what if he did and they were all wrong? He wouldn't be able to get over this heartbreak if he let himself believe that Harry felt the same now, and then it turned out to be some kind of hoax. Draco did not dare to look at Harry again for the rest of the evening, but he could feel Harry's eyes on him all the time. Harry's second lesson with Dumbledore went much like the first. Dumbledore presented Harry with memories of the Dark Lord's past that were supposed to clue him in on his personal history, his way of thinking, and his weaknesses. This time, the memories focused on the poverty of a pregnant Merope Gaunt after she had been abandoned by her husband. Apparently, she had stopped using magic even to keep herself healthy and well, and it had left her in dire need, enough to require her selling family heirlooms to support herself. The next memory had been of Dumbledore's first meeting with the Dark Lord, or better, the child Tom Riddle, in the orphanage where he had grown up. The director of the orphanage had told Dumbledore how Merope Gaunt had appeared on their doorstep on New Year's Eve, beat down and weakened. She had given birth to her son, had named him, had died. The director had also told Dumbledore that there had been strange incidents involving the boy, incidents that, with the knowledge of Riddle's powers, could only be interpreted as him using them knowingly to bully other kids. Dumbledore later found objects he had taken from his victims in Riddle's room. He had kept them around like trophies.
Riddle was very excited at being told that he could do magic.
Harry frowned as he walked across the grounds with Draco, Hermione, and Weasley, telling them about events of the previous night.
He said he'd always known that he was special. That was most important to him, that it would put him apart from others.
It makes sense, Draco frowned. This is typical for pureblood rhetoric. Magic blooms only in rare souls. It makes us special. It was the main propaganda in Grindelwald's days, and the Dark Lord's recycling a lot of it. But he had never heard of Grindelwald at that point, Hermione reminded Draco with a frown. He was a child raised in a Muggle orphanage. Doesn't mean he didn't have the mindset, Draco shrugged.
I think Dumbledore agrees with you.
Harry nodded.
He said, he showed contempt for anything that connected him to other people, made him ordinary.
Connected him to the Muggles around him, you mean? Draco said meaningfully. It's more than that with Voldemort, though, isn't it? Hermione frowned. Sure, he has a great contempt for Muggles, which probably stems from his hate for his father, but he's also convinced that he's the most powerful wizard of our lifetime. So his need to be different from everyone else is not exclusive to Muggles. True, Draco frowned, thoughtful now.
He was trying to get Dumbledore to admit that he was special,
Harry told him.
Advanced for his age. Dumbledore didn't humor him. I guess he found his behavior suspicious.
There we have it, Hermione nodded.
He was powerful for his age, though.
Harry frowned.
To have such a conscious use of his power before even attending school, it's a little scary, isn't it? At this point, all I did was accidentally setting boas on Dudley.
Excuse me, Draco asked, cracking a smile, but Harry waved him off.
He also refused all of Dumbledore's help when it came to shopping for school supplies or getting to the platform,
Harry told them.
Dumbledore said he preferred to operate alone.
He still does, Draco points out. I mean, sure, he has all the Death Eaters doing his tasks, but the real important stuff he entrusts to no one.
It sounds like a real great plan,
Weasley shuddered.
Why did no one realize back then what he would turn out to be?
How could they have? Draco rolled his eyes. I think you're a real git most of the time, and I don't suspect you of becoming the next evil overlord either.
Weasley threw him a dirty look, but at least he refrained from any more stupid comments.
So,
Harry asked Hermione, probably to deter the tension.
How was Slughorn's last party?
Oh, it was quite fun, really, she shrugged, biting into her sandwich. I mean, he drones on about famous ex-pupils and bits, and he absolutely fawns over McClaggen because he's so well connected, but he gave us some really nice food, and he introduced us to Gwynnol Jones.
Gwynnol Jones? Weasley demanded, eyes wide. The Gwynnol Jones? Captain of the Holy and Always?
I wasn't aware there were more than one,
Draco muttered under his breath, and Harry elbowed him, smiling.
That's right, Hermione said. Personally, I thought she was a bit full of herself, but...
Who cares if she was full of herself? Weasley snapped, his ears red. Merlin, Jenny must have swooned. She loves the Harpies.
Well, yes, she seemed quite taken, Hermione admitted. She talked to her for quite a while and got an invite to try out when she got of age, I think.
Weasley's face only got more red with each word out of Hermione's mouth, and Draco wanted to kick her
and tell her to stop talking. It was like watching a potions accident happening. These two couldn't communicate at all. Anyway, Hermione said, quite unperturbed, Slughorn's going to have a Christmas party, Harry, and there's no way you'll be able to wriggle out of this one because he actually asked me to check your free evenings so he could be sure to have it on a night you can come.
Harry groaned.
Weasley glowered into the direction of the lake as if the giant squid had mortally offended him with its mere existence.
And this is another party just for Slughorn's favourites, is it?
He ground out. Just for the Slug Club, yes.
Hermione confirmed. This time Draco couldn't help it. He elbowed Hermione hard, and she blinked, staring blankly at Draco, who rolled his eyes and nodded abruptly at Weasley, whose skin was flushed so dark now that it could only be described as purple.
Look,
Hermione said hastily when she saw Weasley's face.
I did not make up the name Slug Club.
Slug Club, Weasley repeated with an ugly sneer. It's pathetic. Well, I hope you enjoy your party. Why don't you try getting off with McLaggen? Then Slughorn can make you king and queen slug.
We're allowed to bring guests,
Hermione interrupted him, flushing almost as brightly as he did, and oh dear, Draco wished he was anywhere else but here so he did not have to witness this.
And I was going to ask you to come, but if you think it's stupid, then I won't bother.
There was a sudden and absolute silence among them. Draco did not dare to look at Harry, but he wondered if he, too, wanted to spontaneously apparate. You were going to ask me? Weasley asked, and suddenly his tone was completely different. It took all Draco had not to roll his eyes. Merlin, Salazar, and Godric!
Yes, Hermione snapped. But obviously, if you'd rather I got off with McLaggen...
Another pause in which Draco resolutely watched the movement of the clouds across the sky. Oh, look, a bird!
No, I wouldn't,
Weasley said very softly, and Draco felt his stomach there. Good lord, he wished Hermione had better taste. Weasley! Honestly! Finally, with the crisis averted, Draco dared glancing over at Harry, only to do a double take at the look on his friend's face. There was a deep flush on Harry's cheeks, too, not unlike the one Hermione and Weasley had been wearing, and he seemed unnaturally squeamish. Everything okay? Draco hissed under his breath. He couldn't help himself. Harry's discomfort was terribly obvious. But Harry didn't turn to meet his eyes. Instead, he nodded his head jerkily and stuffed the last of his sandwich into his mouth, probably to excuse himself from any kind of verbal answer. The Christmas party was not mentioned again for the next couple of days. With the first match of the season approaching, Harry and Draco soon fell into an easy, kind banter, exchanging friendly taunts and barbs while simultaneously trying to get their team up to speed. Draco knew that Harry was more worried about the match than he was, and that the reason for that was almost solely Weasley's erratic form. Not that Harry mentioned it in front of Draco, bless him, but Ginny was always more than happy to rant about her brother's incompetence and lousy attitude, and Draco did not exactly discourage her. Then there was another incident involving Ginny, her git of a brother, and Harry, and as the cherry on top, Thomas, Hermione, and Victor in his glowing absence. It seemed that after an especially gruesome practice of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, Harry and Weasley had returned to the common room to Ginny kissing her boyfriend. Maybe predictably, after the way he had acted towards Draco this summer, when he'd been under the assumption he was dating his sister, Weasley had lost it. Honestly, Draco had no idea what Weasley's problem with his sister's dating life was. It was not like he didn't know Ginny had a boyfriend. And what did he think they had been doing all these months? Braiding each other's hair? Because Thomas's hair was short. Anyway, apparently, he had started yelling and accusing Ginny of being loose, and Ginny in turn had quite rightfully, in Draco's opinion, retaliated by calling him a jealous prude. And then she had made the mistake of dragging Hermione into it by mentioning Victor. He's only jealous because Harry kissed Cho and Hermione kissed Crumb, and he's the only odd one out. Ginny ranted at Draco across the breakfast table, the only one of the Gryffindors down with him at this hour. If he got some kissing of his own done once in a while. You did not actually say that, did you? He asked, grimacing. Well, something like that. She frowned, tilting her head to watch him. Why? I'm right. You know I am. Be that as it may, Draco sighed. Hermione and Weasley had just been growing some vibes. You can't go and throw her under the bus like this now. Ginny! Oh, she murmured, looking abashed. I didn't know. But I thought it was obvious that Crumb and her were an item back then. She was very private about the details, Draco rolled his eyes. And your brother is oblivious. He wouldn't have realized. Oh, no. Ginny groaned, looking properly guilty now. I feel like a real arse now. She chewed her lip, idly playing with her food. Do you think there's any chance he won't freak out about it? Draco snorted. It was answer enough. Naturally, Weasley was in an abysmal mood when he next saw him and treated Hermione horribly. The poor girl, of course, had no clue what she had done to offend, and by lunchtime she seemed ready to burst into tears, leaving Draco on warpath. Weasley! Draco groaned, his fist closing like a vice around the redhead's elbow, keeping him from following after Harry and Hermione into the Great Hall. What is it? Let go of me! He snapped, immediately aggressive, but Draco did not budge. You listen to me, he hissed. I won't pretend to understand what Hermione sees in you. In my eyes, she was better off with Victor, but for whatever reason, she has her eyes set on you now. So if you keep treating her like this, I will cut your head off with a slicing hex and use it as a potions ingredient. Am I clear? But apparently he could have as well been speaking Swahili, because none of his words seemed to register with Weasley. He just pulled his arm out of his grasp, snarling, "Get off, mate!" and pushing at him for good measure, making Draco stumble. That, in turn, was seen by Ginny, who popped up at Draco's side to snap at her brother, which ended up in another shouting match between the siblings that had to be torn apart by Professor McGonagall, who deducted points from Gryffindor and Slytherin for their behavior. Fuming, they finally made their way into the Great Hall, where a confused Harry and Hermione were awaiting them. None of them spoke for the rest of the meal, leaving Harry and Hermione to make awkward conversation. When the day of the match finally rolled around, Draco took a rare breakfast with his own team at the Slytherin table, using it to motivate his team, which in turn rewarded him by being in higher spirits than he'd ever had the fortune to witness. Okay, remember, he told them as they made their way down to the pitch together, his eyes zooming in on Zoe, Yatten, and Viola in particular, the latter who had to step on Yatten's foot to make sure he paid attention to Draco. Weasley is vulnerable. I want you to destroy him. Someone sounds bitter, Ryan commented, his eyes alight with the prospect of gossip. Do tell. Let's just say he's been a particular dung bomb this week, and I want him punished. Draco muttered, his eyes finding Viola's, who grinned and saluted him. Aye, aye, Captain, she nodded. Shall Abbas and I land him in the hospital wing? Ryan asked casually, making the fourth year next to him look slightly squirmy at the prospect. Tempting as that offer is, Draco sighed. Harry might get angry with me, so no. You may scare him, though. We can make it look like an accident, Ryan offered. It would never be traced back to you. Draco laughed, yet he hit Ryan, effectively shutting him up. When they stepped out onto the pitch about an hour later, fully dressed and facing a cheering crowd, the air seemed electrifying. The Gryffindor team was already out, and to his great disappointment, Weasley seemed to have gotten his nerves under control. He seemed strangely confident, and Harry grinned at Draco during their perfunctory handshake in the way that usually signaled that he'd done something terribly sneaky. Draco's eyes narrowed, but he refrained from needling him in front of Madame Hooch. "Mount your brooms!" Madame Hooch called, and Draco drew his eyes away from Harry's mischievous grin to obey. On the whistle! 3, 2, 1. The whistle sounded, and they were up in the air. Harry and Draco zoomed up highest to search the pitch for the golden snitch. Meanwhile, the scramble for the quaffle had begun underneath them, and much to his satisfaction, Viola emerged victorious. Draco allowed himself a moment of watching her dodge Katie Bell's advances before she passed on to Zoe, and then the commentary started to register with him. I think we're all surprised to see the team that Potter's put together this year. Many thought, given Ronald Weasley's patchy performance as keeper last year, that he might be off the team. But of course a close personal friendship with the captain does help. Draco glanced first back at Harry, who had frozen midair, looking positively livid, then towards the commentator's podium, where he easily spotted the familiar face of Zacharias Smith. Draco groaned out loud. Who gave him the job? Draco complained, loud enough for Harry to hear. I have no idea, Harry ground out. Then again, Smith continued his commentary, in today's match, Weasley's performance might not matter as much, seeing as Potter is facing off against another great ally of his. After all, Draco Malfoy is known for going soft against his best friend. I'm going to break into the Hufflepuff dorms and murder him in his sleep, Draco snapped. Join me!
with delight," Harry answered.
"Oh, and here comes Slytherin's first attempt at the goal," Smith informed them, and both their gazes snapped towards Weasley's goalposts. "It's Baggert streaking down the pitch, and come on, Captain!" Draco muttered, watching as his chaser threw the quaffle, and it was a well-aimed hurl. But then Weasley was there, catching it out of thin air. Draco cursed, and Harry grinned. "Weasley saves it. Well, he's bound to get lucky sometimes, I suppose."
"That's right, Smith, he is,"
muttered Harry, winking at Draco cheerfully before taking off in search for the snitch. Draco grumbled, taking off into the opposite direction. It turned out the teams were well matched. Both keepers did a fantastic job, much to Draco's consternation, so that it took almost 20 minutes for the first team to score, and then it was Gryffindor by means of Ginny. Slytherin was not far behind, though, scoring 2 times in quick succession, once through Viola and once through Zoe, before Demelza Robbins helped Gryffindor draw level again. Then, for a long time, nothing happened, as the keepers kept their goals meticulously clean. Draco knew that it would come down to him or Harry. There was no way that this game would be decided any other way. The snitch, though, remained elusive for a long, long time, leaving the 2 seekers to fly circles around the pitch. Only when almost an hour and a half had passed did the snitch finally show. Draco and Harry both saw the golden ball at the same time and dove for it simultaneously. Draco was positioned a tiny bit closer, but Harry had the faster broom, so he quickly caught up, and then it was a scramble between them, elbows and speed at taunts. "This one is mine, Potter!" Draco hissed, shouldering him sideways once more. "I'll show Smith who's soft on who!" Harry turned to look at him, probably to throw something back, but then he faltered, and it was only one moment, but it was enough. Draco reached out, and then his fingers closed around the tiny golden ball, the delicate wings struggling against his firm grip. "Yes!" Draco yelled, raising his fist up in the air to parade his victory, turning to face Harry, who had frozen, staring at him, flushed completely scarlet, his mouth opening and closing mutely. And then Draco was buried in his teammates' embraces, and he had no time to figure out what Harry's expression meant, or why he had hesitated.